Part 2 of Churchill and the Generals will follow in 10 minutes. Now, at 8:45, it's time for the news on BBC1 with Jan Leeming.
America's Defence Secretary says his London talks weren't about basing neutron bombs in Britain. Friends tell how Mr. Philip Rouse was murdered by muggers in Baltimore. 9,000 run in Europe's biggest race, the Manchester Marathon. America's Defence Secretary Caspar Weinberger has denied that during his visit to London there were any discussions about the neutron bomb being based in Britain. The bomb, a tactical nuclear weapon effective against tank armies like those of the Warsaw Pact, was recently given the go-ahead by President Reagan. Mr. Weinberger also discounted reports that the Libyans might retaliate in some way for the shooting down of their 2 aircraft. As he left for home, he was asked by Tony Skase about the prospect of the neutron bomb being deployed in Britain.
Well, I don't think there's any prospect for it unless Britain should want it. The entire conditions that we announced when we announced the manufacture were that it would only be deployed outside the United States in the event of a consent and desire by the country where it would be moved. And that subject did not arise during our discussions at all because our original statement was quite clear.
After the shooting down of 2 Libyan planes, what are the prospects of reprisals from the Libyans?
Well, we don't anticipate any. The event itself occurred because Libyans fired at our planes in international waters, and we would not anticipate that there would be any reprisals.
There's been a suggestion that President Reagan may be on a hit list.
Well, I hope that is not true for the sake of the world.
Police in Baltimore, hunting the killers of a British tourist, Philip Rouse, say they're no closer to finding his attackers. Mr. Rouse was on holiday with his girlfriend and his son by a former marriage and staying with a friend in Baltimore. While he was out with his girlfriend, her bag was snatched. He gave chase and was then shot dead. Christopher Morris reports from Baltimore.
Detectives went back to the murder scene today searching for clues, but so far there's little to go on. Mr. Rouse, his girlfriend and another Briton left this disco at 2 in the morning, but they were followed by a black youth on a bicycle who snatched Anne Bullivant's handbag. Along with his friend Nigel Lawrence, Mr. Rouse gave chase and was suddenly attacked by 3 more black teenagers and shot. He'd made the mistake in America of trying to have a go.
I think it was admirable and brave, and I certainly wouldn't consider it foolish. But as I said before, how can I say it's brave now when it ended in the tragedy that it did?
The girl Mr. Rouse was planning to marry watched helpless as he was attacked.
And then they sort of did a rugby tackle on Philip and rolled him down the grass, and then there was a shot, you know. They didn't even sort of... There wasn't even a second, you know. It was just...
cold-blooded instant.
Yeah.
Sort of reaction.
I mean, then they shot him sort of in the heart, more or less, and, you know, it could have been, just to stop him chasing, it could have been the leg or something, you know.
Was it an instinctive decision by Philip to chase after them?
Yeah, the first year he was here, he got mugged. They ripped his pocket out, you know, and took some money. And we'd just been talking about it, and it was just, you know, when something like that happens, you just run, don't you? You just gotta try and get it back. Wouldn't that be natural to you?
In England, of course, that would be the natural reaction, but in America, where there's so many guns, people do hesitate.
But you don't think of that, do you? I just stood still, you know, until I heard that shot, and then...
If we've stood still, we've been okay. But I've been saying if we'd done this, if we'd done that, you know, all day, and it doesn't bring him back, doesn't help.
For 9-year-old Carl Rouse, the shooting was a tragedy. Today, he sadly prepared to fly home after being told his father was dead. Mr. Rouse is the first British holidaymaker to be shot dead in America this year, but perhaps it's not a surprising statistic in a country where there are over 60 million guns owned by Americans and where so far this year 10,000 people have been shot dead in similar circumstances. Christopher Morris, BBC, Baltimore.
A Royal Marine sergeant has died in a shooting incident at Musgrave Park Hospital's military compound in Belfast. He's Sergeant William Corbett, aged 34, a married man with 2 young sons from Arbroath in Scotland. The army say a search was mounted in the hospital's security area after reports of an armed intruder. Shots were fired and later Sergeant Corbett's body was discovered. Much of the written evidence to the Scarman inquiry into the Brixton riots of last April has been released in advance of the second phase of the hearing, which begins next month. Among the submissions from individuals and organisations, the West Indian Standing Conference tells Lord Scarman that West Indians in this country regard Britain as the mother of racism, and the Inner London Education Authority and the Lambeth Area Youth Committee criticise what they call heavy handling by police of black youngsters. Police organisations put their views to Lord Scarman as well. The Police Federation questioned the role and motives of black community leaders. The Police Superintendents Association is concerned about the training of policemen and says most are ill-prepared to deal with the problems they meet on the streets. All the submissions will be considered, along with the evidence from the earlier hearings, when Lord Scarman resumes his inquiry on September the 2nd. The biggest marathon race ever held in Europe has been won by Stan Curran of Salford. He led 9,000 entrants from 64 countries all the way from the start in Bolton to the outskirts of Manchester and back again. But as Malcolm Bailon reports, the biggest winners were the many charities collecting an estimated £1 million in sponsorship money.
Clear the road, please. They're on the way.
There were so many runners it took 7 minutes for them all to cross the starting line. They'd come from all over the world to run round Bolton, and, choosing a variety of perches, an estimated 500,000 watched them do it. It was more like a carnival than a race as they jogged and waved their way up the first hill. Many had never run a marathon before. The oldest to attempt it was over 70, the youngest not very old at all. And there were even 6 wheelchair athletes taking part. Thousands of runners, including Jimmy Savile, had been sponsored, and they hoped to raise £1 million for charity. As the temperature climbed into the 70s, most runners took advantage of the feeding stations every 3 miles of the route. Ambulance men were expecting trouble, and they got it. Hundreds of runners fell by the wayside, and many went to hospital with exhaustion and cramp. First home was a local runner, Stan Curran from Salford, who covered the 26-mile course in 2 hours 19 minutes, 4 minutes ahead of his nearest rival. But there was a medal for everyone who finished, wherever they came.
Cricket. The England selectors have made 3 changes for the final test against Australia at the Oval. Batsman Paul Parker of Sussex, who hasn't yet been capped for England, and Wayne Larkins of Northamptonshire are picked instead of Gooch and Gower. And Chris Old comes back in place of Derek Underwood. In the John Player League, Essex stay top after beating Northamptonshire. Somerset and Warwickshire, who both won today, move up to joint second place. There were wins too by Kent, Worcestershire, Leicestershire, Yorkshire and Glamorgan. American golfer Tom Weiskopf has won the Benson and Hedges tournament at Fulford with a final round of 69. And there was a close battle for second place between the West German Bernhard Langer, who had to play his ball out of a tree yesterday, and the Irishman Eamon Darcy. At the 18th, Langer put the pressure on with this magnificent 15-foot putt.
It's not bad.
After that, Darcy had to hole his putt to share second place.
And it's there.
So Darcy finished joint second, a result which guarantees him a place in the Ryder Cup. And there's no place for either Tony Jacklin or Severiano Ballesteros in the Ryder Cup team. In addition to the 10 automatic qualifiers, the selectors have picked Britain's Mark James and Peter Oosterhuis. And that's all from the newsroom for this weekend. Now look at the weather.
Southern and central parts of England and Wales will have a dry, warm day tomorrow with some sunshine. In North Wales and northern parts of England it will be rather cloudy from time to time with a few spots of rain, but some bright spells as well, especially early and late in the day. Scotland and Northern Ireland will start mostly cloudy with outbreaks of rain, but this should give way to dry weather with sunny spells later. And that's the forecast.
Millions of pounds of development aid have been poured into countries like Mali. Yet the people still go hungry.
You know, so many people is starving here, that is dying here, that whether it is caused by starvation or it's only a side effect of starvation, it's very difficult to decide. But the normal death rate is so high already that it's very difficult to discern between starvation and other causes. But certainly there will be people starving from hunger.
The Brandt Commission report identified the growing gap between the rich and poor countries of the world. In October, Mrs. Thatcher meets other Western political leaders to consider the report's proposal to give more money to the nations in need. Yet, as Peter Taylor reports, it's the politics of the situation, the politics both of the giver and the receiver, which prevent a real solution to the problem. That's The Politics of Hunger in Panorama tomorrow night at 8:10.
Now on BBC1, part 2 of tonight's play, Churchill and the Generals. The full text of the play, Churchill and the Generals, is published in paperback, and it's available by post only from BBC Publications, London W1A 1AR, for £3.75 inclusive.
The women's room. After 20 years of trying to conform as a perfect wife and mother, Mira looks back.
Secretly, in my growing up, I dreamed of being a teacher. Solitary, brilliant, fiercely independent. My mother, however, sent me to college to snare a man with good prospects.
You just ruined my life. You realize that?
I just ruined your life.
I'm gonna have to quit school. I'm gonna have to get a job and quit school. I mean, how else are we gonna live?
Well, I can keep working up until the 8th.
Are you supposed to study for exams when you come home with this? I mean, your timing is really wonderful, Mira. If I flunk exams, I flunk out. You realize that, of course.
Did I chase you around the bed? I don't even like sex. And you said your way was safe, Mr. Medical Student. You said it.
It is.
Are you saying you're not the father of this child?
How do I know? There were enough stories before I married you. How do I know who you sleep with now?
Lee Remick stars in The Women's Room, the Monday film tomorrow at 9:25.
Film of the week on 2 in just under 15 minutes is Sergeant Matlovich versus the US Air Force, the true story of a Vietnam veteran and his fight against being discharged on the grounds of his homosexuality. Here on BBC1, The Sunday Prom, introduced by Richard Baker.
Hello again, and this week we welcome you to what's become one of the most popular of the